Mark Harris. There's Mark Harris. I'm gonna bring up just these last two panels, then I'm gonna bring you for the four execs up. Sorry about that. I created that confusion, I suppose. Me too. You never know. We're being recorded for posterity. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. If only when John Erickson sits down will we begin. We want to make sure we have all of his attention. I told you, John, all I got to do is mention one person's name and they all flock to their chairs, including Linda. Very good. You almost ducked attention, Linda. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Are we good on the webcast? Very good. Thank you, sir. Everything else is cool? All right, well, great. Thank you, and welcome back. Hopefully, everyone, including the webcast, you've had your lunch, you've cleaned up, made the mess, cleaned up, and now we're back. We have two more panel sessions we're going to do, and then I'm just going to do a switch of people up here, and we'll do the trying it on report backs. So the last two sessions are, first one we'll talk is Scott Collier and Bill Moody, who is not with Kinder Morgan. Ron, sorry. Despite what his name tag may say, he's with Southwest Gas. They're going to cover competence, awareness, and training, and documentation record keeping. If you'll allow me, I'll just make one comment, because I do remember a funny conversation we had, and an afternoon's worth of conversation about competence. Remember it was pretty funny, but at one point, Ron, probably rightly, looks at me and he goes, "So, do you have anything that defines your competencies?" And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do, and I'd be glad to send it to you, because in the government we force it." I think it was just sort of an interesting moment, but we'd been pushing hard because people have difficulty defining that term, right? And it's defined differently by different people. But yeah, we had and had gone to that point. Now, you could say that the application standard failed, but we have a standard out there at any rate. Okay, so with that, we'll invite up our friends to talk about those sessions. Thank you so much.
We prefer the tag team approach, too, that Linda and Mark used, where that we're going to do this together. The controls.
You're looking for the clicker there?
There we go. Sorry. And if we can do this correctly? Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks for all coming back after lunch. Those that went outside and got hot, at least you can come in here and kind of cool off for the afternoon. My name's Scott Collier. I'm Vice President of Performance Assurance for Buckeye. And
Bill Moody. I'm Executive Vice President with Southwest Gas, a local distribution company.
both of us have had the pleasure of being on the work group for the last 18 months, and quite a learning process for all of us. I think we've all described that to you. Well, before we get into the two elements that we're going to go over today, we're going to kind of rehash a little bit of what you've heard this morning. But, to us, we're both operators, and what makes an effective system, in our view, is some of the things you've heard about this morning already. What resonated to us was being intentional. And intentional has a different connotation than just following processes and procedures. Intentional means that you are actively managing and not sitting back and assuming things are being done. And that the other point was systematic. When you do it in this fashion, intentional and systematic, you're just not reacting to something that's happened in the past. You're actually hopefully staying ahead of things before they happen, and that's where the benefits and where we see the benefits to pipeline safety coming from. The other part is diligence and oversight. You've heard a lot today about, our management commitment, about operational controls, and all of that is really requiring an operator to implement this RP to be even more ever vigilant than you ever have been, and doing your oversight of what's happening in your systems. And that doesn't have to just be for management. That's employees doing the diligence as well. And that's the change that I see, is making sure that our employees feel comfortable telling us the things that they know aren't right. You know, our processes and procedures, we've had them for, at least in my company, 115 or 20 years now. That doesn't mean that they're right. And quite frankly, you know, we're going through a big change ourselves to make sure that we're asking those right questions. So it does involve involvement. Involvement from everyone across the organization. Communication is the key. But don't just assume that that communication is going to take place just because you write a process around it. Go and check. So that's one of the primary thoughts that Bill and I had when we were putting these slides together. So the reward, you've heard about it before. The reward for all of us from an operator perspective and for the regulators and for the public is increased pipeline safety. That's the goal. And we totally believe that we're going to get risk management reduction through making sure our operators employ this RP. We've talked a lot about safety culture. I'm probably the one that learned the most. Ms. Stacy sat beside me many times and gave me the bug in the ear that this is greater than just compliance. It's about culture. And that resonated with me. And to make sure that, you know, we've talked before about making sure we have a lot broader organizational development than just being top-down driven. So those are the key takeaway points for Bill and I.
Stacy just gave you a bug in your ear. She thumped me. Like that. So we'll have, not here. So we'll have two sections that we're going to talk about here. And the good news is this is the reason you came. These two sections, I believe, are the bedrock of any safety management system. And competence, awareness, and training, of course, that's all about your people. And awareness is a very broad term here. You've seen a lot about who's involved, how are they communicated with, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And that's imperative to what's happening here. And then finally, in the background, documentation and record keeping is one of those ones, yeah, we all do it. How much can you really say about that? And just keep in the back of your mind diligence. I don't know how your desk is. I know how my desk is. I don't think diligence comes to mind when you look at my filing system. But in a safety management system, what you communicate and what data you rely upon is imperative. And we had a lot of consternation, not mean, but good consternation, good friction in our committee about saying words like quality data. Well, of course it's quality, or we wouldn't do it in the first place. Well, did you examine the quality of your data? Did you determine what quality data you need before you start? And those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. So key considerations in these two sections is the simplest thing in the world. Thank you. He knows the slides better than I do. Train the desired methods and expectations. That seems self-apparent, but think about the experiences you've had when you run across something you didn't train for on a system that you've been running for many, many years. It happens all the time. Be competent in aspects of the job. And that's not just in my world operator qualification. Jeff made the point and convinced me over time there's a way to do that across the organization. And I would argue at my level, this committee has helped me to be more competent because of the way you think about your problems, the way you think about the solutions you've prescribed and what impacts they may have you didn't contemplate. You have to keep up with your SMS, even though I don't have one yet. It's easy to see that you're going to have to keep all the data relevant to the operation and performance of your PSMS, or you'll just be flailing away and you'll never know if you get anywhere with it. You may see some wins, but you won't know, you won't have that connected, systematic method that we're talking about. We've all heard of the Plan, Do, Check, Act. Think of these terms: interconnected effort. Interconnected means everybody who's involved. And that means the boss, and that means the person out there turning the wrench at the meter. Is your approach comprehensive? And that's probably the big question on the table. I don't know that anybody in this room or on the webcast sets out to do the safety job every day not thinking it's comprehensive. And yet we still don't have a day where nothing happens. So we have to think that through. And you've heard structured and intentional so much And there's a reason for that. That's because it's important. So think about that as we go through these two sections.
Okay, so who? When we talk about competence, awareness, and training, we spent quite a lot of time as a committee making sure that we just didn't stop at management. It's easy to talk about management commitment because that was one of the goals and pieces where we thought maybe we were falling down as an industry, and making sure that our management was totally in tune with the risks that we're wearing, and more importantly, how we were trying to reduce that risk. But when we talk about competence, awareness, and training, the most two important pieces, of course, are our employees, and our management. But we, as an industry, and Jeff mentioned this before, and I think Linda did in operational controls, that all our industry companies are relying more and more on outside resources to help us implement our pipeline safety programs. All of us use them. Where we fall down is they probably, and I can say this for our company, they probably do not understand all our goals and objectives. Certainly they do from a safety of an employee perspective, and we emphasize that with training. But as far as what our goals are for zero incidents and how we're doing training from hazard safety analysis and that kind of thing, probably not to the degree that it needs to be to make sure that we get good performance from a pipeline safety perspective. But then we took it even further than contractors, and this was a point that was brought up kind of later in our discussions, that just don't stop at your primary contractors. Think about your subs too. And that there is a real disconnect generally in most companies. So, to implement the RP 1173 on the who, it needs to be comprehensive all the way down from your own employees to what we call personnel in the RP, which is anyone that might be involved with implementing any part of the pipeline safety management system. Okay, so that's the who. Now, the what. So, what we're talking about in the RP is to make sure that there's an appropriate level of competence for anyone that's involved, any personnel that's involved, and any responsibility as part of the pipeline safety management system. And we use the word appropriate on purpose. A lot of discussion around what do we mean. Each operator is going to have to determine what appropriate means, because we're all different. We all do a lot of the same things, but we don't always do them in the same processes and procedures and with the same types of people doing those actions. So it will have to be appropriate to those folks. Make sure that part of the training is the plan, do, check, act cycle, because what we're after is the continuous improvement. We want input back from those employees after training has taken place and after they've done tasks to find out, do we need to change? Does that training need to change? Should refresher training be done across the organization? Those are questions that we're going to ask all those that implement this RP to consider. The other is about making sure that we have a good path of that information flow. Linda talked about it, Jeff talked about it, Stacy's talked about it. What are we doing to learn? And if you don't have that loop back process with your employees through the awareness side, you're not going to be able to ensure their competence and they themselves be able to feel good about the work that they're doing. Making sure that the consequences for not doing the work are known. Certainly there should be incentives for awards for doing good work, but as I think Ron and some of the operators pointed out in many cases, we need to also take bold actions if we find people aren't following our processes and procedures. Let's don't put up with that type of activity. Certainly if they've been trained appropriately and they've been made aware, we do need to hold people accountable for their actions. So that's a big part of the what that needs to be also thought of in this particular RP. And the why, finally. We need to ensure that everyone involved is competent. Easy to say, but think about it from another side. When we think of safety culture, an employee wants to feel like they're competent. Think about it that way. because they want to come to work every day and go home safely. That's all of our goals as operators. Yeah, we want to see the task done, and we want to make sure that we are profitable, certainly. But if our people don't come to work every day and go home every day safely, then we're not going to hit either one of those, all right? So we want to make sure that we're signaling the importance of training to our folks. It's a part of PSMS that's universal to every pipeline safety management system, that people are properly trained and they're aware of their surroundings. Create confidence and a more proactive culture. We don't just want to learn from incidents. We talked about that before. We want to learn before things happen so that we can reduce risk going forward. And to make sure that every one of our members understands what they're accountable for and what they're responsible for, all the way up from subcontractors to contractors to employees to middle management to top management. And we've been very purposeful in this RP to make sure all of those components of our workforce are covered. Okay, Bill?
Okay, documentation and records. My first thought here was, where do we all keep the library in our companies? Is it on the penthouse there, right, looking out the window? Nope, it's in the basement, right? So as we discussed the structure here and all of the background of this sort of thing, as I said earlier, data is the bedrock. Documentation is a form of data. And the communications that come from that fall under, I guess, the systematic and the intentional side of this PSMS. So they should create decision-making, they should create communications among all of the constituents who are responsible for safety. And of course, our RP argument argues that's everybody who's working at the company. And I don't think that's an overstatement. Documentation has a dual purpose. I had to sit and think about this a little bit as I was preparing here. How do you spice up documentation? Bad news is you can't. Good news is I had a couple of thoughts about it. And one is the dual purpose is you set your expectations. Think in terms of policy. Usually would start a safety statement with a policy by the big person in the company saying, here's what we intend to do when we set out there. And then you got to record your results, because if you don't do that, you don't know if you've improved or not. This seems very self-evident, but we had a lot of discussion about this. High quality and current data. I looked around our own company, and there are times when we have very high quality data that might be a year and a half old. That might be okay, and that might not, right? In gas control, if all of their information's a year and a half old, something bad happened. In the engineering group, a year and a half in between assessments may be okay. Got to figure that out for yourself. Again, self-evident, but think it through. Has to be focused and pertinent to the topic. We argue a lot as safety is picked up. We argue a lot with our state regulators. Sometimes they'll take the approach, I want more. And we'll say more doesn't tell you anything more. So do you create data? Do you create focused and pertinent data? Because the better your data is, the better everything else works. We all do some threat assessment. We all do risk management. PSMS activities themselves, this is something that took me a while to assimilate. The activities themselves create the culture, create the safe environment, but you're checking all of your activities. So that documentation is going to be a new load we all have to bear. One could argue we're doing some form of everything else already if we're doing a good job. But putting it all together in one single cohesive approach is going to be a large task probably at the end of your implementation process. And then a communication of continuous improvement. The data has to be useful to everyone. It's got to be readily available, and it has to be easily accessed. And that could be something as simple in our company as when we change our operations manual. If it were in a book, it's not anymore, it's on a machine, but we once had it in a book and it's that thick for distribution. Has everything in it, including how to respond to an incident. But you can make one change in something so simple like something that distribution companies do every day that have a high degree of importance for safety, which is to simply respond to an odor call. And if we change our procedure in there, we now have 800, 900 people, not counting the 4,000 contractors we have in the world that have to learn that information in order to do what we think is the right thing to do. And so luckily they're pretty diligent and we're pretty diligent, but that's, for example, of readily available across the organization. And that's a big task because we're big dynamic companies and things move fast, even though you've been doing the same thing in my service territories now for 100 years. Documentation falls into two major categories. Like we talked about, communicate your policies of your objectives and your methods. So there's a list of the things, I won't read them to you, but go to the third bullet there. What is your role in the pipeline safety management system? That should be new to everybody who doesn't have one today. Our company doesn't have one today. When we do, that'll be new to us. What's your role? Why do I even have to pay attention to this PSMS thing? I think it defines what I do. Once I know that, I'm good. And clearly, I think everybody here has described a very dynamic process that engages all the decision makers in an organization. And then, of course, this idea of library for corporate learning, that didn't come out of what was written in the PSMS, but I was back in the back reading the safety culture section, and this is what came up. Where's the oracle? Where are you going to go to find out so you don't have to make the same mistake? Right, in our business, make it once, that's bad enough. Make the same mistake twice, and you're on the hook for sure, I guarantee. You want to record progress so that you complete your tasks. In fact, when we talked about incentives in a side conversation, that could be literally, did you prosecute all of the pieces of your PSMS? That'd be a pretty good, a little bit like the biblical term, if you just followed the 10 Commandments, how much more do you need, right? Well, if you just did your PSMS, you'd probably be a long ways ahead of where you are today. Another topic that we discussed a lot, you listen to many of the national speakers that I say subjected ourselves to, that sounds bad. It wasn't bad, it was good. And sometimes they get a little academic, so I would boil it down to a compilation of related data. How do I know, and did I figure out that this affects that? And so many times, what we find out is, you can look at recent reports on pipeline incidents and stuff. There was definitely a connection that this will affect that. And we didn't put the two and two together. And that's a tall order. That is a tall order. And then we want to communicate to the world as an industry. I remember on the blog, we had an issue with gas service. And on the blog, the first blog we got was, well, the idiots over there blew it again. Well, we'd never lost service in this particular area ever, so I didn't know what we were doing again. But I got a pretty good feel for how at least that blogger in public, what standard they were holding me to, and that is the lowest possible profile. Nothing ever happens, ever, 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 that they notice. So what's the value of the extra work? Well, I'm pounding an old rusty nail by this time of day. We know procedures and work practices are essential. I don't think any of us don't have those. The diligence and commitment we can demonstrate internally, so the people see it, and the idea of a person saying, who is in a critical role of saying, I know my boss doesn't care. If you're doing this, they would have to make that up, because you would be visible and you would be in the communication flow if you're the boss. You would be visible and you'd be in the communication flow if you're a person standing out there turning a wrench, because everybody's part of it. Data, if you focus on what we're talking about here in this section, your data just keeps getting better through the PDCA cycle, and therefore your decision making should get better. If it doesn't, you have a different problem. You need a trail, obviously, of your PSMS, because whether we like it or not, major industries like ours have these things. We heard a very compelling discussion from the chemical industry that said it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. What matters is that you're going to have to do it, because it's just a price. It's a price of admission. You need to have safe operations and demonstrate how you're doing that. And then, of course, continuous improvement. You'll hear that word. We'll overuse that word, and it can't be hardly overused, because it's the payoff for all of this. Thank you.